under the guise of redefining and improving what they inaccurately call capitalism. Top insiders representing institutions that control some $30 trillion in assets met at a Rothschild-sponsored Inclusive Capitalism Summit in London to push what sounded suspiciously like global tyranny. From the IMF boss quoting Karl Marx to crony capitalist CEOs and central bankers pushing radical notions of sustainability, the globalist bigwigs consistently blamed what little remains of the free market for the horrific failures of socialism, central banking, and big government. Ironically, many of the attendees enriched by fleecing taxpayers via government were tripping over it themselves to advocate more wealth redistribution and taxes. The conference, held in late May, was convened by Lady Lynn de Rothschild, who married into the infamous, unimaginably wealthy Rothschild banking dynasty that extracted much of its obscene fortune from humanity using the coercive power of government. Attendees and speakers included Prince Charles, International Monetary Fund (IMF) Chief Christine Lagarde, former U.S. President Bill Clinton, Bank of England boss Mark Carney, former U.S. Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, and more. Also in attendance, pension fund bosses, big business CEOs, and other top figures representing an estimated one-third of the world's investable wealth. Among the supporting organizations for the summit were the CIA-linked Ford Foundation and the globalist Rockefeller Foundation. While pretending to defend what they call capitalism, the crony capitalists behind the summit and in attendance were hardly speaking of genuine free markets in the traditionally understood sense of the term. In fact, the powerful attendees were referring to the big government system that has existed in recent decades. A plutocratic economic regime in which currencies and interest rates are controlled by privately owned central banks, where the fastest way to get rich is to buy politicians, and where governments squandered around half of the people's wealth on their scheming even in supposedly capitalist countries. One of the speakers at the invitation-only summit was Lagarde, the managing director of the IMF, an organization which for decades has worked to extract wealth from the third world to enrich the establishment while imposing failed crony capitalist regimes on its victim nations. Throughout her speech, the IMF chief's disdain for free markets and human liberty came through loud and clear. Incredibly, she even quoted Karl Marx, claiming that capitalism carried the seeds of its own destruction. She then quoted Pope Francis as saying that inequality is the root of social evil. The Bible, by contrast, says the love of money is the root of all evil. 1 Timothy 6:10. The IMF boss also blasted the notion that ultimately we should care about equality of opportunity, not equality of outcome. According to Lagarde, opportunity can never be equal in an unequal society. To deal with what she claims to view as a problem, the increasingly radical figure prescribed classic Marxist solutions: more progressive income tax regimes for wealth redistribution, a heavier tax burden on property owners, and more. Transfers and income taxes have been able to reduce inequality by about a third, on average, among the advanced economies, she claimed. As the New American has reported, the IMF Lagarde runs is currently plotting to transform itself into a sort of global central bank in charge of the world currency. It also called last year for fleecing humanity to prop up debt-laden governments and mega banks. Other speakers outlined similar plots under various guises. Population control zealot Prince Charles, for example, cited discredited theories about humanity's alleged role in global warming. Temperature increases have been missing in action for 18 years and counting despite the hysteria and predictions, to demand a radical redesign of society and business. Going even further into the realm of the absurd, British central bank boss Carney lambasted alleged free market radicalism while calling for a truly radical vision of even more powerful, centralized, and oppressive government. Just as any revolution eats its children, unchecked market fundamentalism can devour the social capital essential for the long-term dynamism of capitalism itself, he claimed, outlandishly blaming non-existent free markets for the latest economic crisis rather than the central banking gimmicks and big government plots that largely caused it. at the top of the Inclusive Capitalism Summit agenda, meanwhile, were several radical notions long pushed by the upper echelons of the globalist establishment. One, for example, involves prodding companies to put shareholder interests aside in favor of nebulous environmental and social responsibilities aligned with draconian United Nations visions of sustainable development and Agenda 21. The Rockefeller Foundation has been a key player in the ongoing effort, partly funded by U.S. taxpayers, to create alleged socially responsible companies and undermine what little remains of the free market. Another key element of the inclusive plot involves a further blurring of the lines between government and the private sector. In a column about the conference written by Unilever CEO Paul Goldman and Lynn Forrester D. Rothschild, the CEO of E.L. Rothschild and co-chair of the neocon Henry Jackson Initiative for Inclusive Capitalism, the two offer a wide range of attacks on free markets. According to the piece, free markets have proved dysfunctional in important ways. Among those alleged capitalism dysfunctions, it often encourages short-sightedness, contributes to wide disparities between the rich and the poor, and tolerates the reckless treatment of environmental capital. Of course, in the real world, free markets encourage long-range planning by companies to best satisfy the needs and wants of consumers while creating value for shareholders. Competition in the market, meanwhile, ensures fair prices and high quality while protecting consumers and workers alike. While it is true that liberty necessarily means some will be wealthier than others, those who work hardest, invent popular products, innovate, and more will obviously be rewarded. Even the briefest honest examination would reveal genuinely horrifying inequality under non-free systems. Just examine the lifestyles of top officials in communist regimes compared with the misery and poverty inflicted on those they enslave. Finally, the notion that genuine free markets tolerate environmental destruction is absurd on its face. Compare the environment in Russia or China with the West. Strong property rights have long been shown to be the best way to safeguard the environment. Rothschild and Goldman also lament that less than half of the global population trusts government. Considering the fact that governments murdered hundreds of millions of people in the last century, it is easy to see why. For the bigwig crony capitalists of the world, the mass-murdering communist Chinese dictatorship is doing it right on everything from global warming and economics to corruption and more. Writing in the New York Times, David Rockefeller even claimed the social experiment in China under Chairman Mao's leadership is one of the most important and successful in human history. It also killed at least 60 million innocent human beings. Indeed, for the globalists at the Inclusive Capitalism Confab, the lack of trust in government is a problem rather than an obvious and logical reaction to history and circumstances. Disillusioned with both state and market, people increasingly ask whether capitalism, as we practice it, is worth the costs. The two continued, again ignoring the fact that the system that exists today is not genuine capitalism but rather a mix of crony capitalism and socialism. We see this in movements such as Earth Day and Occupy Wall Street. In many parts of the world, from the Arab Spring countries to Brazil, Turkey, Venezuela, and Ukraine, frustrated publics are taking to the streets. Of course, aside from the outside role in fomenting many of those protest movements, every one of the countries mentioned is ruled by tyranny of some variety, especially of the socialist and Islamist sorts. Occupy Wall Street, meanwhile, was bankrolled by billionaire statist George Soros, whose wealth was amassed with plenty of assistance from the Rothschild dynasty. Soros also played a major role in Ukraine. Then, the two bigwigs, plutocrats, according to Politico magazine, call for more of what can only be described as fascism, properly defined. Addressing the failures of modern capitalism will require strong leadership and extensive cooperation between businesses, governments, and NGOs, the two claimed in their column without having cited a single failure that can properly be attributed to free markets rather than government and the central banking cartels. Transformational change will come only from businesses and others acting together. If those schemes sound suspiciously like fascism as defined by Mussolini, good, they should. Though our work has only just started, we are convinced that within a generation we can redefine capitalism and build a sustainable and equitable global economy, they added. Finally, the two-tall radical crony capitalist, promoting outfits such as the World Business Council for Sustainable Development and the Consumer Goods Forum for uniting key industry players and putting pressure on governments to join forces in the search for sustainable capitalism. As the New American reported from the Conference on Sustainable Development in Rio de Janeiro, the movement is far more sinister than the innocent-sounding names would suggest. Last year, even corporate giant Monsanto, known for its controversial crony business model, lobbying, and its widely criticized genetically modified organisms (GMOs) officially joined the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. The group of powerful interests includes bailed-out mega banks and big oil, all united in pushing the UN's totalitarian-minded Agenda 21 scheme for sustainability. Purporting to tackle inequality with bigger and more oppressive government is also at the top of the inclusive capitalism agenda. Thomas Piketty recently released a major propaganda book purporting to justify all of the anti-capitalist extremism masquerading as support for improving capitalism and using government to make everyone more equal. Author Hunter Lewis, the co-founder of Capitalism.org and former CEO of global investment firm Cambridge Associates, however, explained that government has been the principal cause of growing inequality. Crony capitalism is the opposite of capitalism, he noted in the recent piece. It is a perversion of markets, not the result of free prices and free markets. Lewis also said Piketty's new book serves the same purpose as Keynes' big government theories, serving the same short-sighted, destructive policies. John McManus, president of the John Birch Society, has also long spoken out about how crony and monopoly capitalists seek to use government for their own benefit. Blaming the free market for escalating social ills is akin to blaming wet streets for rain, he said. When the market is truly free, upward economic mobility occurs. When the engines of real wealth production become constrained by taxation, regulation, and controls, economic stagnation followed by economic downturn is assured. Citing various examples, McManus also noted that big business found out that big government was its ally. The greatest advocates of socialism in the past 100 years have been Stalin, Hitler, Mao Zedong, Castro, and a swarm of lesser-known criminals, he continued. What these pariahs established is the way America and the rest of the world is heading. It is called the New World Order, and it is being created by government leaders, monopolistic crony capitalists, and international socialists. People who wish to remain free had better get involved in the fight to rein in government and repudiate the wealth impeders, or the future will not be kind. It is true that the world and humanity face major problems that must be addressed, even in terms of pseudo-capitalists exploiting the population via government to benefit themselves. The root of those afflictions, though, has been deliberately misdiagnosed by the bigwigs who met in London. The prescriptions offered at the Rothschild summit will only lead to more exploitation, more tyranny, more centralized and less accountable government, more unearned wealth for the establishment, and more human misery. What humanity really needs are freer markets, honest money as opposed to cartel-owned central banking scams, honest government, more freedom, more faith, and respect for individual rights.